This week on Overbore, I'll be sitting in a garage talking to myself. I'll be answering emails and questions from you guys. I'll be telling you how to become a motoring journalist and indeed whether you should. And I'll be introducing you to this, Audrey, my 1970 Citroen D Special. DS. I can say DS. Rich isn't here to correct me. Ha ha ha! Hello folks, welcome to episode 6 of Overbore. You will note somebody is missing. Rich hasn't made it for personal reasons, so I'm flying solo this week. So bear with me. I know this probably won't be the same back and forth banter you love so much from Overbore, but we'll do what we can and hopefully we'll have an episode by the end of this. So come join me. I am in my own garage in Audrey. Audrey is my Citroen D Special, 1970 Citroen D Special. I hesitate to use the term car because car suggests a vehicle that's mobile. At the moment, she's sort of serving as an admittedly very lovely garage ornament. I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a bit. What I'm going to try and do today, I'm going to try and answer some of our reader questions. We've had some emails from actual people. I haven't made them up, honest. Well, I have made one up, but we'll get to that. Then I'm going to tell you a little bit more about Audrey, and because obviously we've alluded to her a couple of times, and I'd really just want to introduce you introduce her to the podcast. So here we are. Let's get started, and let's have a crack at some reader questions. So first one comes from Keith Inch. Keith says, if you wanted to know, I watch on YouTube. I got a bong. Never mind. I'll turn the sound off. That might help. There we go. There's a laptop down here in case you hadn't guessed. Sorry about that. So Keith says, are press cars allowed on dynos, or is there something in the contract or email from manufacturers that says no? Really good question, Keith. And actually, Rich and I have talked about trying to get some press cars onto his dyno in the future. It varies from manufacturer to manufacturer is the honest answer. Some manufacturers explicitly prohibit it. Some manufacturers don't. The way I would tend to play it is if I was going to put one on the dyno and we were going to talk about it, I would just mention it to the manufacturer first, because I think it's fair to give them an idea what we're doing with their hunk of £40,000, £50,000 car. I think it's just common courtesy. I mean, really, I could stick it on the dyno and adopt the attitude of doing it now and apologising for it later, rather than asking for permission. Which there's an adage about that. I can't remember it now, but anyway, I would like to do it though, because it'd be really interesting to see whether some of these brand new cars can get their power, because I'd really like to do it with an electric car. But Rich sadly can't verify this, but I think it's going to be quite hard with an electric car because obviously the problem you have with the dyno is that you need to come off the power after the run. In a manual car, you just dip the clutch or to stick it in neutral. In an automatic, you can put it in neutral, which is not to be advised, but it can be done. In an electric car, it's actually quite hard to do that because electric motors don't really disengage. They're either turning forward or providing regenerative braking. So we'd have to devise a way of doing that with an EV. But if we could, I'd really quite like to, because it would be interesting to see some of the power figures that they could make. And that's something we're working on. So I'd say watch this space. It's something we'd really like to do and we'll come back to. Let's see how that goes. Peter Collins says, hello from my 180,000 mile Mark IV Golf PD130 car. Great car. Mark IV, honestly, I really think Mark IV Golfs are, they're one of those cars that they are still firmly in banger territory, but they're going to be perceived one day as a sort of a high point, a kind of high watermark. Those and the B5 Passats of the same era is kind of a high watermark for Volkswagen quality. I think we've talked about this on the pod in the past with BMW. BMW hit their stride kind of around the mid-90s in terms of perceived quality, and I think the same thing happened to Volkswagen. They produced these cars that just felt so good, so solidly screwed together, and the Mark IV Golf was one of those. And it was kind of a high watermark before accountants came in kind of the early 2000s, and cars started to get just a little bit more brittle. You could just sense that the quality of the interiors wasn't quite as good as it had been, which I think is probably because they had to cut costs. They realised they were massively over-engineering things, and they realised they could make a bit more profit. It's a shame, though. I mean, my folks actually had a B5 Passat, and we used to drive it across Europe now and again, and it was so absolutely rock solid. It was only 110 horsepower diesel, but it was a brilliant, brilliant thing. And I've owned, as I've mentioned in the past, an E39 BMW 5 Series, which hails from that same era. And you do find, and I especially found it, I remember thinking when my folks upgraded from a B5 to a B6 Passat, there was a drop in terms of the perceived quality you were getting, which is a shame. But I think Volkswagen and BMW and many other manufacturers kind of went on to different things, if not necessarily better. But anyway, yeah, Mark IV Golf, great choice of car. I'm really behind that. 180,000 miles. You've obviously kept that going really well. I'm always a fan of big high mile cars and people who've really looked after them and made them last. Because cars can last. You just got to look after them, you know. And I think the sad thing is a lot of people don't. A lot of cars don't kind of achieve their full potential because they don't get to go to those big miles because people aren't kind of putting in the regular servicing and so on and so forth and actually repairing them well. You know, they get to a certain value and obviously people just kind of check out on that sort of thing quite often. So, you know, good work. Nice. What did you actually ask, Peter? I'm waffling on about Mark IV Golfs. He says, I listened to you guys while tackling the M27 on Friday mornings. You're a great distraction from the fact the M27 is more akin to a car park than a motor. The M27, I grew up in Southampton, which is obviously how I met Rich, who lived that back then in Eastleigh and now lives in Fareham. And yeah, great memories. The M27 was always a pain in the backside. He says, is it not the fact that EVs tend to be SUVs because they need the additional floor space for the batteries and they're big, heavy cars because of the batteries? I think this refers back to our saloon cars episode when we were talking about the fact that saloons are going to be, I have this theory that saloons are going to become more popular as more and more people realise that actually in an electric car, what they want is aerodynamics, which helps them improve the range. Yeah, it's absolutely the case, and that's part of the reason that SUVs are quite popular with manufacturers, and quite a lot of EVs are SUVs, is because obviously if you are fitting batteries under the floor, you need to give up less passenger space if you've got a higher riding vehicle than in a lower riding vehicle in a saloon car. But I also think that's going to change. We're seeing kind of, I'm not very good at looking into the future with cars. One of the things I'd like to do is get some other journalists, some industry journalists onto the podcast to talk about what's coming and what's going to happen next in the industry, what to watch out for. And that will come in the future. But I'm not very good at kind of crystal ball gazing. But as far as I understand it, what we are going to see is batteries that take up less and less space and give the same sort of capacities back. So we are going to see more and more that, and we were already seeing it, that actually modern electric cars are better packaged than, you know, you look at a Mark 1 Nissan Leaf, that would have come out in kind of the late 2000s. There are all sorts of odd bulbous bits inside where batteries have obviously been crammed in, or bits of battery have been crammed in, and you know those cars could do about 70 or 80 miles on a charge. By contrast, we're now seeing regular family hatchbacks that have no real compromises, perhaps a little bit less floor space, perhaps a little bit less legroom, that can do 300 miles, 250, 300 miles on a charge. So there is a progress, and it's going to change, and it will get better. But yeah, definitely at the moment, I think manufacturers are happier with an SUV EV, and there's definitely a drive towards that. But I do think a part of that as well is that SUVs are simply more profitable for manufacturers. They can sell an SUV for a higher price than they can a normal saloon car, and there is this kind of, like it or loathe it, there is this kind of lifestyle premium that goes with that. And that means that people are willing to pay more for an SUV, and therefore manufacturers can charge more for a car which essentially has the same mechanicals underneath. And that then means obviously better profit margins and so on and so forth. So yeah, I think we are going to see that that there's a growth in saloon cars. You are right that manufacturers like making electric SUVs because of the space issue, but I think that's going to become less and less of a thing as time goes on. Right, what else we've got? I've got my laptop down here. I feel like I'm in the Fast and the Furious. I feel like I'm tuning, and it's going to pop up danger to the manifold in a minute, but there's a reference for you. It feels a bit incongruous in a 1970 Citroen D Special, but hey ho, there we go. Tom Winch, who watches on YouTube as well. Hi, Tom. Well, I assume it's Tom Winch. His username is TomWinch9107, so I'm going to guess it's Tom Winch. It might be Tom in Winchester. I don't know. I may be misnaming you. I apologise. Anyway, you might not even be called Tom. It might just be a random username. Anyway, I'm going to call you Tom for the sake of ease. Apologies if you're not called Tom. He says, can we comment rather than email to get hairstyling tips from Scrof? I think I see what you did there. Long gone are the days when I had any sort of useful hair. I mean, I do still have hair. I just choose not to. I never really wanted to get like a kind of a comb over or something like that. So the minute I started receding and getting thin patches, I thought, well, all gone. So there you go. That's my hairstyling tip. Once it starts going bald, get rid of it. It's nice. It's cool in the summertime. He says, I've currently got on my driveway 2 small hatchbacks, 2 MPVs, and an SUV. Yeah, great. Do you know what? Sometimes there is a case for choosing the car that best suits your needs and having a bunch that kind of fit whatever you need. I mean, most people, 2-car driveway, you've got a big one, a little one. Why not have an MPV or an SUV and, something smaller as well? No reason why not. What's the next car going to be? Is Vecchi an option? Vecchi is Rich's Iveco van, and I have actually said to Rich, Vecchi is very full of rust at the moment, so that's why Vecchi's not on the road as far as I understand it. But I have actually said to Rich a couple of times that we should do a podcast in Vecchi. Whether we do it in the cab or whether we try and convert the back into some really cool podcast studio, which I'd love to do, but probably it's one of those things that will always be in my mind, never actually happen. Especially if it's full of rust. Apparently cat sleeps in there at the moment, so yeah, we'd have to evict the cat. And this is a really good question actually. Tom says, do reasonable and rational people buy new cars? Well, yeah, I mean, this is the problem, is I can absolutely see the two sides of this story. And that's probably part of the reason for doing this podcast. Is on the one hand, you can get a really good usable used car for 3 or 4 grand these days. Why on earth would you buy anything new? But I can also see it the other way around, which is the people who, aren't that interested in cars, just want something where they pay out a monthly payment. That monthly payment might be quite a lot more, but they get a warranty and they get their choice of colour and their choice of specification. My gut feeling has always been, if that's what people want to do, let them pay their money. But as a journalist and, a bloke who doles out car advice, my advice is always just, know what you're letting yourself in for and how much money you're spending. And if you go in armed with those facts and you're still happy to spend that money because that's your choice of your way to spend your money, who am I to stop you? That's my view. I think I'd always struggle to buy brand new because I'd never be able to drive the thing without thinking about the precipitous depreciation. But I know people who buy new cars. My dad buys new cars, but what my dad does, he will save up and up and up and up, and he'll buy a brand new car and it will last him 10, 15 years or so. He doesn't change on the 3-year PCP cycle. He pays cash every time, saves up his money, and then buys a new car. And he kind of worked his way up to that over the years. And again, who am I to stop him doing that? If that's the way he wants to spend his money, and he gets a good long use out of it. And the benefit for him, of course, is that in having a car for that long, he knows it's always been serviced well, always been regularly maintained. He doesn't have to buy somebody else's second-hand kind of ex-lease car and not be certain about whether it's been well looked after, whether it's been, driven badly and so on and so forth. He ends up with a car that he knows and can understand and cherish for a long time. And I think that's a perfectly acceptable and sensible way to run a car. I myself have never bought a new car. I think I would quite like to. There's a little part of me that kind of would like to do it just once in my life, just to say I've done it, just to go into a showroom and choose the colour and then come back 3 weeks later and there is the car you've specified sitting there shiny and new and have all that. It's just a lot of money to pay for that privilege. So I've always struggled with it a little bit. But our family car we bought at 3 years old, so you've sort of taken that initial hit of depreciation off. But part of the reason we bought a car that new was because once I had kids, I just wanted the best sort of level of safety I could afford. And I thought the best way to do that is to buy a nice, safe new car with a good crash test scores and so on and so forth. So we basically spent as much as we could afford, got a little bit of a loan out, and that was that. So I think there are different, it's horses for courses at the end of the day, isn't it? So, you do what you want to. But I certainly don't begrudge people buying new cars because quite apart from anything else, if nobody's buying the new cars, there are no cheap second-hand cars for us to buy. So somebody's got to do it. And if they don't do it, we're all going to have to buy brand new cars. So I'm okay with it. No problem. Now, my last question isn't really a question. This is one I have made up. But it's a question I get asked quite a lot. And I thought it might be quite interesting to talk about on the podcast. And that question is, how do you become a motoring journalist? And indeed, should you in this day and age with AI coming and so on and so forth? Being a motoring journalist is a fabulous job, obviously. I really enjoy it. But it's not all sweetness and light. It's not as glorious as it might look on the outside. For one thing, the rates of pay in the industry are low. It's something I would really like to do something about because, it is a semi-professional job. And while it might look like flouncing around on launches and so on and so forth, there is a certain level of skill to it that, you have to be able to write, you have to be able to judge a car fairly, you have to be able to not just write, but write entertaining copy consistently day after day. And, that can be creatively quite draining if you're doing it constantly, like churning things out on a mill, as increasingly people are being expected to. Motoring journalism has changed a lot since I used to read magazines when I was a kid and I wanted to become a car journalist. There was once a time that you could work for one of the big magazines and your working week would be that you would take a bunch of cars off to do a group test in Wales, drive them round for a day, stay in a hotel or a rented cottage overnight, drive them around a bit the next day, do photography, come back home the day after that, spend two or 3 days writing the review, and then your fifth day would be some other little odds and ends you had to do at work. That would be your working week. What a great way to live, eh? I mean, that would have been. It's not like that anymore because of the needs of the internet and the fact you have to kind of feed the beast content. You've got to be writing stuff time and time again. Sadly, I think that's meant that the quality of our motoring journalism, mine included, has gone downhill because I can't give a car the attention it needs. If you spend 2 days driving a car around and you're spending most of those 2 days in the car, turning around for photo shoots, so on and so forth, you get to know that car really, really well, and you get a fair idea of many of its foibles. And then if you're writing you've got the time and the space to write a long and in-depth review of that car, you can tell the reader all sorts of things they might want to know, they might not have known, they might not have understood. Once you start condensing that down and pushing people to do, more and more in less and less time, the depth to which you're able to go into with each car review becomes, I say, shallower and shallower. And we're at a point now where there are times that in the rush to get content up on the internet, to be the first on Google, because that's everything these days, is to be first. If you're first, you stand a better chance of being at the top of the Google homepage. And that is everything, because obviously it means you're getting more eyes on your copy, more hits, and that's the big challenge for everyone. Quite often what therefore happens is that, road testers will go on a launch, they will drive the car, and they'll write the review in the hotel that evening. It will have to be, they'll have pressure on them from above to get that review filed by 11 p.m, 10 p.m, 11 p.m. And I don't think, there are times I've had to do that, and I've often found myself driving the car again the next day and going, oh, actually, that thing I thought and I wrote in that review yesterday, it's not actually the case with this version, or something like that, and that I think is where you end up with a bit of a regret. So it's not as glorious. These are not the halcyon days of motoring journalism. For all that, it's still a great way to earn a living. You still get to drive around in new cars, which is great for an enthusiast. But yeah, in short, it's still a great job to do, and I still think it's worth doing. The problem is the pay grades have not gone up with inflation. The starting salary at some of the big magazines is still as little as kind of £20,000-25,000, and when you're in London, that's not a lot. And it can be quite hard to get going. So I wouldn't say don't do it, but just be aware of what you're letting yourself in for. How to do it? Oh, sorry, AI. Yes. I think I could be completely wrong here, but there is a lot of fear about AI taking away journalism jobs. Yes, maybe this may be wishful thinking, but I think that could happen. But I also think that AI can't drive a car. So it can only tell you what other people think about that car who have driven it. And so I think it's in terms of actually being able to review a car and tell you what a car is like, there will still be a job for journalists in exactly the same way as there'll still be a job for theatre critics and film reviewers and restaurant reviewers and so on and so forth. I don't think AI is a significant threat to motoring journalism particularly. I can see it taking quite a few jobs, but I can also see there still being a place for people who do this. So how to get into it? Right. Well, with some difficulties, you can imagine it's not a big industry. There aren't a lot of people who do it. And actually getting into writing about cars is more a case of who you know rather than what you know. I'll tell you how I did it, which is probably a case of how not to do it, but there are advantages, which I'll go into. I actually went to university and I did a degree in creative and professional writing. You might think that's 3 wasted years and quite a lot of wasted money. I think it probably, on balance, you don't have to do that. It did give me an advantage in that, my writings, what it really taught me about is, parts of speech, parts of language, and how to write, how to string a sentence together. But I know a lot of most motoring journalists don't bother going to university, and they don't suffer from it. They find their way in through other forms of journalism, through blogging. And actually, these days, a lot of people are starting out on YouTube and reviewing cars that way. And actually, there's probably more future in that than there is in writing. So it's a great way to have a crack at it, to be honest with you. I think, you are YouTubers who review cars, journalists who operate on YouTube are able to reach far more people than a lot of the traditional motoring media. And that's the fault of the motoring media. We haven't been good at reaching out to people who, might be a good audience for us. So, but yeah, I think that's a great way to start off on YouTube. And if you're good, you may get picked up by one of the larger magazines or outlets that might want to take you on and give you a job. So that's a good way to do it. And if you want to do writing, all I can say is start a blog, write about cars. You won't be able to review cars off the bat because manufacturers simply won't give them to you. But the best thing that you can do is try and build up a frame of reference. So drive as much as you can, friends' cars, parents' cars. That really is a big part of becoming a motoring journalist, is having a frame of reference that gives you the ability to refer back to and to base your opinions of the cars you're reviewing on, because that's really that's part of the thing that's part of the training, effectively, is to form that frame of reference. I think I've mentioned before, one of the magazines I used to work for used to say it would take about 2 years for a new hire road tester to form that frame of reference. And that's driving new stuff every single day. To be able to actually go out and review a car with that full rounded picture of, what cars are like and whether a car is comfortable or not comfortable, or handles well or doesn't handle well, or so on and so forth. So drive as much as you can, write as much as you can, video as much as you can, and get to know people as best you can. Because, a lot of the jobs that I've had have really come through knowing people, have come through meeting people, have come through doing work experience. My first job in the industry was off the back of work experience I did while I was doing my degree. My big break into the world of road testing came because I took annual leave from that job to do work experience again. And I met people who helped, who kind of, then ended up becoming one of the chaps I met ended up becoming my boss. Another one I drive with regularly on events I know very well, as a colleague of mine. So these people, they start to be people who and that you get a sort of reputation. People start to know your name, and it makes a difference in a small industry like this one. So that's the best advice that I can offer. Should you do it? Difficult one. Do it, but don't expect to make a lot of money. Do it for the love of it. It's not a job that gives you an awful lot of financial security. You will find you're scrimping and scraping throughout it, but you'll have a great time while you're doing it. And be prepared that there may come a time when you simply have to give it up because you can't afford to do it anymore. Promotions do not come easy above a certain level. You're kind of looking at filling dead men's shoes. Not dead men's, retired men's shoes, let's put it that way. So yeah, it can be quite difficult to pull yourself up the ladder. It's not easy to break into, and then it's even harder to progress up the ladder. But give yourself the best chance you can. Drive as much as you can. Write as much as you can. Get as much practice as you can. Show off your writing skills and who you are, and ask for feedback. Ask for advice. Improve yourself that way, and be prepared to accept that feedback, because sometimes it won't be very complimentary. You've got to have a thick skin. You've got to be able to take constructive criticism. Obviously, you don't want online trolls, shouting at you. That's not on. But if people, and if your friends and relatives say this is good, but you need to do this better, take it on board and make those improvements. And eventually, one day, you may well find you catch the eye of somebody who matters. So that's my advice. That's the way I would go about doing it. So yeah, I think I've probably waffled on for long enough. But before we go, I just want to give you a little bit of an introduction to where I am at the moment. Audrey, I have now owned, where are we, 2025. I bought Audrey at the start of 2023. And Audrey is very much a case of do as I say, not as I do. There are three things I say to people who ask my advice on buying a car, especially a classic car. Don't buy the first one you see. Don't buy the cheapest one on the market. And if you're buying a car you don't know, get it inspected. Now, what I do with this, it's the first DS I went to look at, and I got very, very excited. It was probably the cheapest DS on the market for a reason. And I was full of my own hubris and thought, yeah, I know what I'm looking at. It's fine. It all looks great. It drives. If you're getting a driving DS for £8,000, you're doing all right, aren't you? I picked it up and I drove home feeling absolutely on top of the world. For context, the DS, this isn't a proper DS for reasons which Rich will gladly explain to you another time. But I'm going to call it one just for the sake of brevity. It's more of a mouthful to say D Special. That's my excuse anyway. So I'm driving home and I'm going, yeah, I've got a DS. Way, excellent stuff. And I'm thinking, smells very, very fuely in here, doesn't it? I'm sure it's fine. And then it started raining and I turned the wipers on and then the wipers stopped working and I thought, I'm sure it's fine. And then I got home and I parked it up in the garage, and the next time I pulled it out of the garage, I pulled the handbrake on and the handbrake stuck on, and trying to release it, I broke the handbrake and it then wouldn't release. And so I had to release it by whacking it with a screwdriver, and then I had to keep parking it in gear because the handbrake then couldn't put the handbrake on because it would get stuck on. And I thought, I'm sure it's fine. And then the next time I drove it up the hill, and at the top of the hill it stopped working, and I got out and thought, oh God, it's not fine. And then I looked under the bonnet and there was a wire that had fallen off the voltage regulator. And so I plugged that wire back in and it started, and I thought, oh, it's fine. And then the next time I went to start it, it wouldn't start, and it wasn't fine. And I had to get it flatbedded down to Rich, where it was going to go anyway to get a few bits and bobs done. And I thought it would be down there for a couple of months. It ended up staying down there for around 18 months because everything Rich kept finding things, and I kept saying, no, we need to get it done properly. Let's do it properly. Let's get that done. It had a lot of welding. It had a new power steering rack, which is very expensive on one of these. It had what I've forgotten. I've sort of blanked it out from the horror of it. It had new heater bits, new heater matrix, new heater valve, new heater motor. What else? I dread to think. There's so many bits. He had a ton of wiring to do behind the dashboard. So yeah, it did not go brilliantly. I spent far, far more money. I drained my life savings because in the pursuit of, yes, I can do this. I want to get this car back on the road. I believe in it. I want to save it. And toward the end of last year, she was finally back on the road, and I drove her home. And it was about a week before one of the rear doors wouldn't shut, so I had to get that welded up. And then another week passed, and then she stopped working again. I spent so much money on this car now. It's not even funny. I'm laughing. It's not really funny. And I'm at a point now where I really just need to let her sit for a while I recoup my savings. So she is a very beautiful piece of garage ornament at the moment. I bought a car that I should never have bought, really, because normally when I buy a car, I'm fastidious about service history. I like to make sure that, you know, all the paperwork's there and that it's got really good history and really good provenance. One owner cars, and I've always bought cars like that. This car was imported in 2019 from the Netherlands. As you can see, it's left-hand drive. I know literally nothing else about it other than that. It has no history, no paperwork other than the V5. Yeah. The more I tell this story, the more I think, what was I doing? But I just got excited on the day, and I thought, here's my chance to own the car of my dreams. DS has always been the car of my dreams, and I had an opportunity to own one, and it's as simple as that. And I did that, you know, naive, angelic choirs coming out of the clouds going, follow your dreams. And yeah, didn't turn into a dream. But anyway, she's still here. My view at the moment, I was tempted to sell her because I was so tired and so fed up toward the end of last year, but I've decided she's going to sit here probably for a couple of years, and then one day we'll get her out and we'll have another go. We'll go again once my finances are in a slightly better condition. So we'll see. But yeah, so that's Audrey. I don't know if you'll see her again. If I'm ever doing a podcast on my own, you probably will. I may even get Rich up to my house to enjoy the wonderful surroundings of my garage, which is very appealing, as you can see. We might do a podcast here. So we'll see. You may see Audrey again, but for now, that's that. Anyway, I just wanted to say thank you for following and liking and subscribing. If you've done that already, that's absolutely fabulous. Please do so if you haven't. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or some other podcast platform, follow us. I don't know what you do on Apple Podcasts, but whatever you do that's like following us or whatever on other podcast platforms, keep in touch, because we do want to hear from you. Drop us a line if you want to get in touch. The email address for us is overboardpod@gmail.com. That's all one word. And you can find us on all sorts of social media, Threads, Instagram, Blue Sky, and the other one. But yeah, you can come and interact with us, come and have some, have a chat, talk to us in the comments. We normally reply if we're not snowed under with other things. You can ask us questions in the email, in the comments, and if we do another Q&A, which I'm sure we will again fairly soon, hopefully with both of us here, then you can we'll answer your questions then. So I just want to say thanks for listening so far. You're a great audience, and it's just wonderful to be able to do this, and I'm really pleased you're with us, and on to bigger and better things. And hopefully we'll have another episode for you next week, which will be back, and it'll be normal service assumed. Anyway, take care, tatty bye, see you soon.